The book we're looking at today, Dr. William J. Baldwin's Spirit Releasement Therapy, a Technical Manual from 1991, is a groundbreaking landmark in the field. It's a stunning work and one of my favorite books of all time. And it's an epic book that runs in at more than 450 pages and is really the size of a telephone book, if you remember those. So it's quite a weighty tome. If you practice past life regression enough, eventually you're likely to encounter some spirit releasement issues. And they can include earthbound spirits, dark force entities, or ETs. Baldwin's book stands out as a field-defining work that's an essential read for anyone who encounters any type of spirit interference or spiritual entities during regression work. Now, this kind of thing tends to happen more often if you're dealing with advanced past life regression clients, or when you start to work more to between lives, because there we're explicitly connecting with more spiritual entities, but on the light, helpful side. Spirit guides, soul group, soul council. These are all spiritual entities that are wise and helpful. But along with that, there can be a certain naivety or lack of discrimination or definition where other entities can pop in that pretend or act as if they're spirit guides, but can be the other trifecta of entities which are on the darker side. And by dark, I just mean ignorant, confused, and need some light shone on them so that they can be freed. It's an advanced work, so prior training in hypnotherapy and past life regression or other spiritual modalities is really going to be necessary in order to fully understand what he's talking about or to grasp the techniques as a practitioner. But even for the general reader, it's a very enlightening and interesting book. Baldwin passed away in 2004, but for those with some training and experience in the area and a karmic connection that brings you the kind of clients that need this work, he's left us with an invaluable resource. It includes over 100 pages about past life regression and is infused with between lives regression. And we can note he did this before Michael Newton wrote his book on life between lives. Baldwin references instead the book Life Before Life by Helen Wambach, which came out in 1979. And Life Between Life, not Life Between Lives, but Life Between Life by Joel Witten that came out in 1986. So we can note this Spirit Releasement book by Baldwin came out in 1992, which is 2 years before Michael Newton and his book that he termed Life Between Lives. Baldwin's book is detailed and precise, and it makes clear definitions and distinctions between various types of spiritual entities that can affect our clients and come up in a therapeutic context. The foreword to the book is written by Dr. Edith Fiore, who is a PhD in psychology and an expert in past life regression. She also wrote an important book on spirit releasement called The Unquiet Dead, which she published later in 1995. That's another landmark book in this area. Baldwin himself had attended a talk given by Dr. Fiore in 1980 on the subject of past life regression, but it was during that talk that she mentioned the problems caused by spirits of deceased humans that can be interfering. So it was from Fiore that Baldwin first heard of this. In fact, he was incredulous when he heard it, but he went on to get training, and that caused him to start past life regression himself in 1981, and of course he went on to become an expert in spirit releasement as well. Baldwin was a dentist, but he went on to get a doctorate in clinical psychology with a dissertation that was the basis for this book. So this book does come across as a little bit academic, and it's full of citation references from the literature supporting his statements. Typically, there are a few of these per page, so it can read like a bit more of an academic and technical manual than pop psychology. Now, when it comes to spirit releasement therapy, some people see it as being controversial, or they might be skeptical about spirit attachment entities, even if they accept the existence of other types of spiritual entities. But there is another key limiting belief, or a limiting emotion when it comes to addressing SRT, which is fear, or at least discomfort with the idea of dealing with deceased humans who are now in spirit, or in dealing with malevolent, aggressive, could be called demonic spirits. Fiore says in her introduction to this book, quote, Baldwin's fearlessness and years of experience now offers the reader excellent descriptions of these beings and the various categories involved, as well as a step-by-step how to approach to freeing the client from their grip. End quote. Now, by mentioning fearlessness, Fiore implies that, for some others at least, there may be something to be afraid of, or the possibility of fear in approaching this topic. This is important to acknowledge. It's also important to understand that the ultimate antidote to fear is not courage, it's understanding. So fearlessness comes when you A, have a step-by-step guide that works as you work with it, so you know what to do, and B, when you have a calm, clarity, confidence, and peace. So there's what you do and there's how you're being while you're doing it. Now, the clarity starts by being very clear on when SRT is applicable and when it isn't. This progresses by being clear on the category of entity you're dealing with. This clarity concludes when you're transcending any notion of fear, as you know deep within that though they may appear to be evil and dark on the surface, the ultimate reality of life and the universe is only love and light. Now, love and light is a popular phrase, but it can take courage and experience to bring that pure understanding of love and light to bear in the face of the most challenging therapeutic situations with more aggressive, deceptive, and manipulative energies in our clients. So complex SRT is an advanced modality for advanced healers who have evolved to a deep inner confidence and have faith, and preferably a faith that's been tested. This often requires a deep personal initiation of felt experience. Most can be afraid because perhaps they should be. If you're not competent or educated in a particular area, you may be naive or overconfident. If you've been initiated, you have a knowledge and a humbleness, but also an authority. If you've gone through the flames, you can emerge as a phoenix. Then you've gone beyond. And so you can put out what seems to be the heat of hellfire, but is really something that can be tamed and becomes a source of light and warmth. Because fire in itself is neither bad nor good. Fire at times is necessary to burn off the old that would inhibit growth, like a forest fire that allows the next stages to come, so we have the space and the fertility to grow anew. As Baldwin says, quote, many traditional therapists reject the notion of past life therapy, partly because it's based on the questionable philosophy of reincarnation. Both traditional and unconventional therapists, as well as many past life therapists, reject the notion of spirit releasement because it's based on the objectionable and, to many people, frightening possibility of spirit possession. End quote. Now, this is quite true, and I find it odd that when a past life therapist is doubted by hypnotherapists and he finally gets a chance to say to another regression practitioner that they have gone too far. So past life people have made it this far, but freeze up when it comes to taking the next step forward. This is what Baldwin says as he continues, quote, yet in clinical practice, the open-minded therapist with an awareness of the spiritual dimension and a working knowledge of these modalities will find evidence of both conditions, past life recall and spirit attachment. The purpose of this technical manual is to serve as a guide for those who wish to pursue the possibilities of spiritual healing in a clinical setting. End quote. So Baldwin specifically mentions a clinical setting and a particular approach. So when we look at spirit entities, we know that they have been acknowledged throughout human history, but they have often been dealt with unskillfully. And this is often based on the initial lack of clarity and misunderstanding of what's happening in the mind and the emotional response, which is fear, that leads to a reactive behavior, which is aggression. All of this is problematic and something that SRT strives to overcome and remedy. So as Baldwin says, quote, religious texts assumed a preconceived notion that all spirits are demonic and took the classical adversarial approach to exorcism, steeped in ritual, fear, and superstition. This widely accepted method of exorcism seemed violent and without compassion. Thus, I rejected the traditional religious approach. I discovered a book by psychiatrist Carl Wickland entitled 30 Years Among the Dead. His conversational approach with these intruding spirits was practical, methodical, and compassionate. Invisible helpers from the spirit world assisted those lost and confused spirits to find their rightful place in the light. End quote. This is a vital distinction. Spirit releasement therapy is a conversational approach done for complex issues that require discussion with entities that can discuss and with therapists that know how to lead the conversation. To me, if you're doing entity releasement and it's not conversational, it's either not a spirit releasement issue or it's not complex. You can work with some non-verbal energy or give a one-sided instruction, and that can work in simple cases. But genuinely using SRT properly means having a complexity. And there are certainly many situations where spirit attachments will not simply leave because you visualize light energy being whisked away by the Archangel Michael, or because you demand them to release. That will not work with complex cases. That may work with simpler ones. For the complex cases, SRT steps in, as Baldwin says here, quote, a process of releasing the attached entity is gentle, logical, methodical, systematic, and grounded in sound psychotherapeutic techniques. Depossession, disobsession, minor exorcism, or spirit releasement procedures are not dangerous or frightening once a client is aware of the reality of the situation and when the therapist harbors no fear of the subject. In a doctoral program in clinical psychology, my dissertation was entitled Diagnosis and Treatment of the Spirit Possession Syndrome. Psychologists, psychotherapists, mental health practitioners, psychiatrists, and members of the clergy have attended the trainings and now use the techniques in their private therapy and counseling practices. For many people, there is a deep awareness that there's a truth in these concepts and that this is another avenue of healing to no longer be ignored. End quote. So, as with past life regression, many more therapists, healers, or religious teachers will use these techniques than are willing to speak about those techniques. And they won't speak about them for a fair, strategic reason, even though they know. Yet there are those that don't know and don't have experience who are willing to speak about these techniques to discount them. This book may have been ignored as the voices of those who discount come into our minds and prevent study, knowledge, and experience. That becomes a deceptive thought form in itself. But that's the way of the world. A lazy, simple prejudice can cut off reading a complex, demanding, but rewarding book. That's why it's important, because ignorance builds up like forest litter. But a spark of curiosity can ignite a fire that burns through old prejudice and allows the fresh, greener sprouts of a new, better growth to start. So let's look at a key when working with SRT, and that is being able to contact a verbal spirit to allow this conversational approach, which is practical, methodical, and compassionate. The way this works is that the client relays the words they hear in their head from the entity. Most often, hypnosis is used to make this contact, but some clients can have this communication ongoing and unwanted in a normal conscious state. They can then be aware that the inner voice that they hear is different from their own inner voice. So in practice, this means we're dealing with two entities, the client and their attached spirit, so we can speak to them both at length and use similar therapeutic patterns for both, because to heal one is to heal the other. So here's a case study that Baldwin gives to illustrate that. So we start remembering that spirit releasement therapy exists alongside hypnotherapy and past life regression, because the root cause of attachments are often early in this life or in the past lives of the client. So spirit releasement therapy means regressing the client to their past lives or the past to heal the cause. And B, often the spirit attachments themselves have past lives or root cause events from centuries ago. So we then regress the spirit entities themselves to their past lives or their past to help them release some of those root causes. So in the book, Baldwin gives a case study of a woman who has a phobia of flying. He regresses her to being 10 years old in this life, where she witnesses a fatal crash at an air show. And that is the root cause of her spirit attachment, because the spirit of the dead pilot attached to her. So feelings and thoughts of the phobia about flying were not from an event that she experienced in her life or in a past life. She picked up a phobia of flying, but that was actually a phobia and feelings held by the attached spirit, and she felt the spirit's feelings as if they were her own. So when people have spirit attachments, they often realize that the thoughts or feelings they have feel in some way that they're not their own. But when this happens at such a young age, people don't really know who they are. So when you're less sure of who you are, you take on the thoughts and feelings of other people. In hypnotherapy and regression to this life, the client could describe how she perceived the spirit of the pilot. Her wise spirit guide could reveal that the spirit resonated with her energy, followed her home, and has been attached ever since. The therapist can then engage that spirit in conversation and regress him back to 30 years, and to relive and recall his death and to heal it, and therefore releasing that stuck fear energy from his past and helping him to move into the light. So that healed him, and it allowed the client to be healed of the fear that had been attached to her. That residual energy that had been influencing her is now freeing her from her phobia of flying. So that case study is an example of an earthbound spirit. And in the book, Baldwin says, quote, "Earthbound spirits, the surviving consciousness of deceased humans, are the most prevalent attaching entities." End quote. Now, there are a number of variations that can occur. Some are known to the client, some are not. Some are passive and neutral, some are active and unhelpful. They are not uniform. As Baldwin says, quote, "An attachment can be benevolent in nature, totally self-serving, malevolent in nature, or completely neutral. Attachment to any person may be completely random, even accidental. It can occur simply because of the physical proximity to the dying person at the time of death." End quote. So there may be a perception by shows like The Ghost Whisperer that entities only attach when they have unfinished business on Earth. So while that's not impossible, it's certainly not the case most often. As Baldwin says, quote, "Earthbound spirits remain here not because they're attempting resolution, but because they're arrested in the timelessness of the spirit realm, perpetually re-experiencing the mental, emotional, and physical trauma of their death." End quote. Baldwin points out that earthbound spirits are acknowledged in spiritual cultures around the world, as he cites, and I quote, "Spiritual teacher Paramahansa Yogananda identifies some ghosts as the earthbound spirits of deceased humans, which he called tramp spirits. They are troubled for some reason and wander aimlessly. In some cases, they cling to living humans, causing mental and physical problems." End quote. So from earthbound spirits, we move to another distinct type, which is a dark force entity, which is a term that some might also call demons, evil spirits, or other names like that. But like all of us in a dualistic world, we have some light and dark. And if we let dark come to the forefront and act on it, we can be seen as a dark person. And yet, in ultimate reality, darkness or evil doesn't exist itself inherently. It is just an ignorance of or turning away from the ultimate truth of light. So our compassion comes in seeing beyond their darkness or evil to the truth that they have light within them, but they are just not seeing it or connecting with it. So this means we approach them with calm, clarity, confidence, and peace, and have conversations, and not fear or aggressive demands to release. We can conversationally help them point back to their own light. As Baldwin points out, that dark spirits are acknowledged in spiritual cultures around the world, especially in the Bible. So he says, quote, "In the New Testament, fully 1/4 of the healings attributed to Jesus consisted of casting out unclean spirits. He specified more than one type of spirit. The Old Testament also makes reference to interference by evil spirits." End quote. The third category we can look at is ETs. Now, while this topic can be a wormhole of great complexity, in spirit releasement, we have a collection of relatively straightforward tools and techniques to learn to release inappropriate attachments to get a therapeutic resolution for our client. Now, ETs have become a popular subject, and therefore this could take a very long time. In fact, it would probably take a separate video. So there are some key other points I want to address in this video. So if you're interested in having a whole nother video about ET attachments, let me know in the comments. So now we're going to move on to just the most important thing in spirit releasement therapy, to not get distracted, is to know that we have to be very clear when spirit releasement therapy is applicable and when it isn't. And that brings up the idea of differential diagnosis. And this is something Dr. Edith Fiore herself emphasizes in the foreword, where she says, quote, "Dr. Baldwin casts much light on the issue of differential diagnosis, the starting point of any therapy in these fields. Without this, an unsuspecting therapist might go off in the wrong direction." End quote. Now, this is a big issue in ETs because people get very confused. They either think that any ET attachment is good and you shouldn't release it, or they want to release everything and order things to release without discussing and finding out why they're attached. So before we get into the complexities, we must know the basics. And that is differential diagnosis, which means identifying the cause of symptoms by ruling out conditions that have similar symptoms by running tests to rule out possible conditions until we can identify the most likely cause. This is of tremendous significance because the most important issues in SRT is that 1, people ignore or don't see spirit attachments in any issue, or 2, people see spirit attachments in every issue. There are 2 major errors people make. They apply spirit releasement therapy far too little or far too much. So if you're a spirit releasement therapist or go into this work, you will find many people who come to you and say, "I need spirit releasement therapy," and they do not. They should be referred away to do hypnotherapy, past life regression. And if in the course of that, spirit releasement therapy arises organically and overwhelmingly, then that's another thing, but often it won't, despite the client's attempt at self-diagnosis. So in this way, we go through all other possible options before practicing SRT, which becomes like a modality of last resort for most people. And it's certainly not a first option if they've done very little other healing work. So SRT is not presented as an alternative cure for all mental illnesses. It's not a regression back to pre-enlightenment days of blaming all mental illness on spirits. I'm making that clear, and Baldwin makes this clear too, as he says, quote, "The client. These techniques are most effectively used with reasonably normal people with average and typical problems." End quote. So that is completely the opposite of marching into mental psychiatric hospitals and saying, "Put down your medicine, it's all spirits." He's saying the exact opposite of that. And we can go another step further. Personally, I'm very slow to confirm attachment by a spirit until we get overwhelming evidence. And for me, that involves a lengthy discussion with something that says it's an entity, where it follows the kind of responses I would expect. And ultimately, I keep the mindset of transcending good and bad, self and other, so that we can heal spirits, but we don't have to buy into the ultimate reality of it. We don't have to buy into the ultimate reality of good versus evil, or even self versus other. I still have that mindset of there is no ultimate evil in the world. There is no ultimate division. All there is divine unified light. And it's from that standpoint and understanding that I work with spirits, partly not even buying into the divisive dark reality they are trying to portray. So it's important not to diagnose or recommend. So another key implication of this, don't see every issue that you have that has some worry, fear, nightmare. It does not mean that it's a spirit. And even more importantly, do not point the finger at others. Do not diagnose other people and tell them they look like they have a spirit attachment. Do not recommend other people go and have SRT sessions. I cannot and will not work with people who say, fix my family member. They seem to have some problem and I think it's a spirit. They must come for themselves. So if you yourself are wondering if maybe I have a spirit attachment issue, you can send me an intake form. So I have training courses in advanced spirit releasement therapy where I show the variations of many types of intake forms you can see. So you can see the contrast between people who think maybe I've got something and they write an intake form and think, well, this could genuinely be something. Well, if you read some of the intake forms of other people, they may be shocked or surprised that, wow, I thought I had an issue, but it's nothing compared to the intake form of somebody else. So I see hundreds of these forms and I can compare and contrast pretty easily. And even if there is a compelling intake form, for me, spirit releasement therapy is only confirmed as an appropriate modality once I'm in the middle of a sustainable conversation and dialogue with entities, and I can define and see them reacting in expected ways when the client is in hypnosis. So that is the kind of level of evidence I need before I'll consider saying you might have an attachment. If you just have a hunch based on no experience with someone you know but have never hypnotized them and are not expert in this thing, you have no business giving your own diagnosis. The only thing that you could really do is point people towards a book or course in this area and see if they go, oh, that makes so much sense. Thanks for pointing it out. I really appreciate that. This is something that I'm going to take up myself. This is now my idea and I'm going to pursue that. If they say anything else, anything along the lines of, why are you accusing me of this? I'm not happy about that. Then you messed up. You should not be saying that. And any of the pushback they have is not them being resistant. It's them giving you the social feedback that you have acted inappropriately. And it's now on you. It's not them that have a problem. It's you that need to hold your tongue or be more appropriate in the way that you deal with people facing these issues. So I hope that is clear and you can take that in a graceful way, understanding the loving intention with which it is said. So to begin the wrap up of this review, this book does include a number of other sections about issues that surround spirit releasement therapy. So he does write a lot about multiple personality disorders and the clinical details of differential diagnosis. And this is really gets into a much more technical manual for a trained audience, such as practicing clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. There's also a large section on recovery of soul-mind fragmentation. Now, I haven't mentioned that thus far because it's not something that I personally experience, comes up in my thousands of clients at all. So it's not something I'm interested in speaking about, but it's something that other people may do, particularly if they're doing some shamanic practices. So they may find those sections interesting, and you can have a look at those if that's something that you're into. Now, there is a very large section of past life regression, which is my field of expertise, as well as SRT, and it is very well done for those that are newer to the subject of past life regression. So you don't have to be well trained in past life regression. In fact, if you're not, you'll learn a lot about past lives and the intersection of past lives, between lives, and spirit releasement therapy. So that's also just as a bit of a warning, in that the first 200 pages of this SRT book are leading up to the prerequisites or preliminary understandings. And it's really from page 199 that he then starts getting specifically into Earthbounds, Dark Force entities, and ETs. And for me, that's where this book becomes truly great. So already quite a long review, so it's enough now to say that while this book may sound like an academic and intimidating book and a weighty tome, it is well written and clear. And it does include much relatable case studies and direct transcripts from the sessions. Now, admittedly, this may be a little bit much for a casual reader, but it has plenty to deeply satisfy a well-read healer or somebody with some healing experience. But really, this book is best as a way of figuring out whatever odd things have happened to you, be that as a therapist or client, so you can find a way forward. As a manual, it offers a very good description of a process that I can personally testify to, as it's proven unfailingly accurate in my own experience with hundreds of people over the last 2 decades of my own work. So this book is best for people who have a karmic connection to this area and a pressing need to pick it up. I also have courses that are very clear, very precise, very methodical, that omit a lot of excess or related writing for people who want to get straight to the point of how to do SRT in a very clear way. So if you're interested in that, you can see the online courses that I have that explain it and give them a methodology. And I also have advanced mentor training for people that read this book and say, I think I understood it, I applied it and practiced it with some people and I'm getting some results, but there are some things that I'm not sure about, and I'd really love to be able to talk to an expert about it so that I could assist, firstly, this client that I'm halfway through treating, and secondly, so that I can offer this as a really confident and as competent as I can possibly be therapist. In that case, I offer really advanced training, and you can go to my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute, to see how you can get mentoring line by line, minute by minute, through the kind of sessions that you're giving to your client. It's like having me looking over your shoulder and saying, less of that, more of this. Something didn't happen here, it could have. This is what might happen. Here's how I can prepare you for getting through these 3 clients you're doing now and set you up for the next 300 that you're going to do throughout your career. So if you're interested in this and you've lasted this long, I understand this is a long review, but it is a lifelong mission to get really good at this. As Baldwin says in his book, quote, "There is no way to capture in writing the infinite fluctuations of the human psyche that occur in the course of a 2-hour session. The richness of the human interaction is left for the practitioner to discover and experience during the practice and application of the techniques described in the manual," end quote. So great quote, very wise. Wisdom on every page in this book. So I can only encourage everyone drawn to this area to get Baldwin's book and to go ahead and gather your own experience. And if you need help from someone who's done that for 2 decades, go to my Past Life Awakening Institute. So if you're interested in exploring more as well, you can read my book, Past Life Awakening. 7 case studies illustrate 7 spiritual laws. And that includes 3 of those 7 case studies have extensive complex spirit releasement therapy, and they show how that's applied, where I give hypnotherapy to the client and work through whatever phobias or events happen in this life. I take them to their past lives, the past lives of the entities. So that is a nice readable way of doing it as well. This is a very technical manual by Baldwin. I've made mine more like a novel where I really illustrate how it's done. I explain it a little bit, but I illustrate it through my past life case studies. So I hope you enjoy reading this book. I invite you to read my own book, take my training courses, and if you're at an advanced level, then let's do some mentoring together. It's tremendous fun, really. So people can have this idea of fear or limiting beliefs. Once you have the education in it, this becomes, to me, the most fun, most challenging, most enjoyable part of all spiritual regression therapy. Thanks for listening. Do like, subscribe, follow the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all much appreciated. Thank you. To get my book, Past Life Awakening, 7 regression case studies illustrate 7 spiritual laws, which you can get as a paperback, ebook, or Kindle, check the links in the description. To have hypnotherapy or past life regression sessions with me, click the link below. To get training with me that includes video courses, technical manuals, session swaps with fellow students, and can include personal mentoring with me, click the links to learn hypnotherapy with my Hypnotherapy Specialist Institute, or past life regression, spirit release between lives with my Past Life Awakening Institute.